Hello, and thank you for joining us to celebrate 50 years of CMI Women. I'm Heather Melville, the chair of CMI Women, and I'm delighted to be joined today by a stellar cast of speakers to share their insights. 2020 has certainly been a year of reflection and projection for us all, a year to reflect on achievements, set benchmark, and lay out a vision for what needs to happen going forwards. CMI Women is focused on developing the world's strongest pipeline of female managers and leaders. We provide members with a comprehensive schedule of events and networking opportunities, access to support through our online career development centre, evidence reports and best practice developed by CMI and our wider community, as well as access to the CMI mentoring platform. But our network is not just exclusive to women. We encourage men to join and act as allies and agents of change to become everyday champions of women at work, because as we all appreciate, it takes everyone working together to make real lasting change happen. And inclusive, balanced workplaces are more productive and create the best networking, the best working environments. It's been a year of unimaginable challenges. Reflecting back to March 2020, the theme for International Women's Day was Each for Equal. CMI contributed by highlighting the practical steps that managers and leaders can take to create a more equal and inclusive workplace. But just 2 weeks after, the whole country, the whole of the UK, was plunged down into lockdown. We knew that we needed to support our members immediately and practically through the early days of the crisis. Alongside the creation of Better Managers Manual, a practical guide helping managers navigate through challenges presented by the onset of the pandemic, CMI Women hosted a series of public digital events on themes such as flexible working, crisis management, mental health, well-being, the new employment landscape, and the new good governance, all considered through the lens of gender balance, engaging thousands of viewers live and on demand. And since the 1st of April 2020, over 11,000 women have joined CMI as new members, and that number is constantly rising. We built on this success to revisit the themes of our Blueprint for Balance in a series of public digital webinars aimed at those looking at practical ways to be better managers and achieve gender balance in management. We also know that now more than ever, as we try to deal with the impacts of the pandemic, we need gender balance in the rooms where decisions are being taken. We've spent the last months asking the government to ensure the needs of working women are taken into account when policies are being created. And through our own press coverage and partnerships with other leading organisations, we have warned that advances made over the last 50 years for women in the workplace now risk being significantly set back. Speaking up for women in management in this way is a clear example of the important role that CMI plays in the national debate and how we endeavour to promote your views. Our digital events have opened up opportunities for managers across the world to be involved in our conversation, and I'm sure this applies to many of you joining us today. Please use the chat function to say hello, tell us where you are in the world, pose questions, and share your thoughts on the discussion. Please remember to also hit the button to let us know you're enjoying the event. If you're not yet part of the CMI community, please click the link in the chat to stay updated with the important work of CMI Women. And our work is definitely important because whilst the proportion of women on boards across the FTSE 100 almost tripled in the last decade, very few women occupy an executive director role, and women are still not getting the top jobs. According to the Female FTSE Board report this year, there are just 7 female CEOs across the FTSE 100 and around 13% of female executive directors. Simply put, 93% of FTSE 100 CEOs are men. With that in mind, I am absolutely honoured that NatWest Group CEO Alison Rose, the first woman to lead a major UK lender, will deliver our keynote speech tonight. Alison will reflect on achievements in creating the world's strongest pipeline of women in management and project a vision of how we might fully realise the benefits of gender balance.
Businesses today are operating in a hugely competitive economic environment. And the simple truth is that if a business wants to succeed, gender equality is an issue it cannot afford to ignore. All the research tells us that there is a direct relationship between a diverse leadership team and improved business performance. And it is not just gender. Inclusivity is critical. Diversity of thought and removing the homogenous groupthink that is the enemy of innovation and intelligent risk management is vital if we are to remain competitive. Research carried out by McKinsey has shown that companies in the top quartile for ethnic and cultural diversity were 33% more likely to have industry-leading profitability. If as a business you care about revenue and profitability, you need a balanced team. If you care about understanding and meeting the needs of your customers, you need a balanced team. It is really that simple. The good news is that when it comes to building diverse and inclusive businesses and communities, we can all play a part, and the rewards are significant for everyone. Whether it involves making sure women have the same opportunities as men to develop their career, for example, or making sure men have the same access to family-friendly policies and flexible working, and feel just as supported to have the same access as women. Change is happening. It is clear that both FTSE 100 and FTSE 250 companies are acting. Women are rising to the top, perhaps overcoming barriers that should not have been hard to overcome, with leaders and boards who have worked hard to remove these barriers for current and future generations. And we should celebrate these stories of success, as it is only by sharing and understanding how change is made that we can achieve our collective ambition. We should not need a compelling reason to ensure gender equality. It is simply the right thing to do, as well as good business sense. That said, if businesses and governments do have any doubt, then we should remind ourselves of the McKinsey Global Institute report, which recently said that getting more women involved in the workforce could create up to $12 trillion in additional GDP globally. And at NatWest, I recently sponsored the Rose Review of Female Entrepreneurship at the request of the government, outlining the disparity between male and female entrepreneurs. This report found that helping more female entrepreneurs to thrive could represent £250 billion of economic potential for the UK. One example of how we've responded to the report's recommendation is through our Women in Business banking proposition, which contributes to our wider commitment to help create an additional 50,000 new businesses by 2023. And we now have over 600 accredited specialists among our frontline bankers that offer bespoke mentoring, networking, and professional business advice to women-led and owned SMEs. So that is a real commitment that we're making. Now, as I've said, we have certainly made progress towards achieving gender equality, both in society and in the workplace. And that is something we can all be proud of. But we're not there yet. We have significant barriers to overcome. There are socioeconomic barriers. There is a strong link between gender equality in society and equality in work. Women have 77% of the average access to financial services that men do, and that is despite women controlling the majority of consumer spending today. Low employment rates and unpaid care work, with an average across the world, women doing 3 times more unpaid care work than men. The corporate performance model makes it more difficult for women who face a double burden. 75% of men and women agree that a top-level career implies anytime, anywhere availability to work that requires sacrifices in one's family life. And mindsets and unconscious bias continue to play out, with only 43% of men in senior management positions strongly agreeing that women are as good leaders as men, versus 76% of women. So there is clearly no silver bullet here to address this complex range of challenges. But we do need a holistic approach, one where gender diversity is an integral part of our business culture, where it is ingrained in everything we do. At NatWest, for example, at the top of the organisation, we operate a formal boardroom inclusion policy, which contains several measurable objectives, targets, and ambitions. And it's a policy that reflects our board's ongoing commitment to diversity and inclusion. And not just boardroom diversity. We also have formal targets for our executive committee to have at least 30% of women in the global top 3 leadership layers of each of their business areas by the end of 2020. We chose 30% because it marks the tipping point where female contributions influence teams enough to change behaviour and culture, and that is really critical. It is also a milestone on our journey. It's only a first step to achieve full gender balance and distribution at every level by 2030. From the start, we have been clear that gender equality is not a women's issue. It is about gender balance, deconstructing harmful social constructs relating to traditional gender roles, and ensuring equality of opportunity. This means a proactive focus on increasing the number of male colleagues in traditional female roles as well, in our case, for example, human resources. We have set the tone from the top and worked with senior leaders to help create a psychologically safe culture where our people feel able to raise concerns and challenge unwanted behaviours. Importantly, we have also found enthusiastic support from our employee-led networks and allies who play an active part in promoting gender equality and the culture we need to succeed. Progress also requires persistence. It takes determined effort and time to deliver tangible, but most importantly, sustainable results. And at West, we have just come to the end of our current 5-year strategy, and we're now seeing the results of that persistence and determination. Our top 3 layers of the organisation are on aggregate now 37% female, which is an increase on 8% since 2015. We've increased our pipeline by 11% to 43%, and the group overall is 50% female. Looking at the business environment generally, I do believe the future is bright and we are making progress. But continued progress, sustainable progress, will require us to remain committed, persistent, and holistic in our approach. Now, I'm delighted to see such progress of getting women on boards. I think that is absolutely critical. But we need more women in executive roles as well. They are the future pipeline for the boards. We also need more women in mid-management roles and senior management roles, more recruits, and the pull of female talent to build a pipeline. Because it is only by doing that will we create the sustainable change that is required. None of this is easy. It never has been. Back to my comment earlier of there are no silver bullets. But the costs of failing are significant and the opportunities are huge. Thank you.
Wow, some very powerful and inspirational words there from Alison Rose, the Group CEO of NatWest. Very unfortunately, Alison is unable to join us tonight for the Q&A. However, we have a powerhouse panel from the CMI Women Board to join me in taking some questions. So without further ado, can I first welcome back Heather Melville, who is the chair of the CMI Women Board, spending her career in banking and finance, actually working closely with Alison Rose, and now a director of client partnerships at PwC. I'm joined also by Deputy Chair Joe Abbott, who is the Director of Director of Transport Services at Atkins. Joe Moffat. Welcome, Joe, and the Deputy Chair of CMI Women. And last but certainly not least, Angela Owen, who is the founder of Women in Defense and a longstanding senior officer in the military. Welcome, everybody. So some great words from Alison. I have to ask each of you, what message resonated most with you? Let me start with you, Heather.
So I know RBS NatWest quite well, and I have to say I'm extremely proud to be associated with an organisation that put their money where their mouth is. So the fact that they are at the place where they have got 37% of women in the top 3 echelons of the organisation volumes, I think also to get anything done and to make any achievements, you have to put some measurements behind it. in the same way that we do if we're going to grow a new market. We put some tangible actions and measurements behind it. So I think it's a great achievement, but it can only do it when you've got numbers to stand behind it.
Yeah, so some excellent targets there. Jo, what stood out for you?
Yeah, so I particularly early on the bringing out that inclusivity and diversity of thought is really important, and the sort of barriers represented by the sort of socioeconomic factors as well, and how we sort of pull in the sort of intersectionality elements of the wider sort of equality, diversity, and inclusion into sort of our I suppose guiding our focus around gender, but also learning from the journey that we've already gone through around gender. And this sort of idea of having a holistic approach. The formal business target is very impressive about the progress that they've made as an organisation. And I like this idea, the focus on the sort of 30% tipping point as well, as a sort of good milestone in our journey towards a sort of 50% gender equity. So those were the elements that stood out for me.
Yeah, lots of very good stuff there. Now, Angela, what are your thoughts from that speech that Alison shared with us?
So I've written down deconstructing harmful social constructs, which really resonated with me. Family-friendly policies for all genders, not just women. I feel that a lot of women look into the corporate world, the world that is, in my sector, defence, still largely run by men, and perhaps don't like what they see. And I think that men don't like their corporate world either. So let's sort out the family-friendly policies. Let's make it possible for men to take paternity leave and have the paternity pay that enables them to take the leave. So that was the thing that really resonated with me, family-friendly policies.
An excellent point, two sides of the same coin, men in the home and women at work. Now, we have a lot of, you're all successful female leaders. We're joined by many aspiring female leaders. What's your advice for them? How do they get to those senior ranks that Alison was sharing the data of? Maybe this time start with you, Jo.
Yeah, okay. So I guess I come at this from a sort of from an engineering perspective, as the STEM sector. So I think there's a key point around being a male-dominated industry. I've always been different, so there's a key piece around sort of understanding the strength of being different, rather than seeing it as a hindrance, see it as a strength. And so understanding that and sort of holding on to that difference, being authentic, understanding the strength that brings, but also understanding your own strengths and play to them. And that, I suppose my last point is around asking for help, building your network and asking for help from people around you when you need it. So those would be my bits of advice.
Absolutely. And that last point is really important. And at CMI Women, we endeavor to give you that help. Angela, what are you going to advise our aspiring leaders? How can they get ahead?
I think I would say try and get your work life, your home work balance right. And it sounds easy to say that because we all have responsibilities, we all have pressures, competing pressures on our time, whether it's work, whether it's our partner or caring responsibilities. But there is a lovely saying that Kat Little, who was Director General of Finance in the MOD, used to say, which is, me first, then you first. I can only look after you if I look after me first. So me first, then you first. That's the one piece of advice I would hang on to. I just wish I followed it myself.
What a great piece of advice. Easier said than done, right? So Heather, what's your top tip for those who want to be in that top echelon?
So this year, 2020 March, has actually reset everything for us. We're all in the same place in the terms of we can't have some people having access to the senior people. We can't have some people being off to network in the pubs or the social places they would go together, which would sometimes prevent us as women from having the same opportunities. So for me, this year has allowed us to think differently, be creative. Resilience is one of the key things that we've all had to develop. That thing around change, from suddenly thinking we're not going to the office to your office becoming your home, everything else around parents, and I say that both men and women, having to school their children at home and at the same time run a home, look after parents and do their roles. I think those things are important. So good leadership is really important in terms of how you lead, particularly leading remotely. A couple of points I want to finish on is using this time, as I said, it's been reset, to invest in yourself, to invest in learning something that you didn't know already. And I always say there's a power hour in every day. And that power hour we should use wisely to invest back in our knowledge so we can bring that into the work. And just to touch on the point you've made, Angela, our health is our wealth. And quite often we have not made time for our health. So being able to walk, being able to exercise, using some of that time we would travel to do that can only make our minds sharper and make us healthier. And the other thing to add with that, it makes us a leading light and an example to the people who work for us and around us.
So those are great points. And actually building on that at CMI, inspired by our immediate past president, who is Bruce Carnegie Brown, he instituted 2 hours at Lloyd's of London where there are no meetings. And we've done that now at CMI. We call it walk and talk hour. Get outside, get some fresh air, and don't be in front of a camera. So that was a great tip. So some wonderful advice there. Now you're all in very gender challenged sectors. So Joe, you're in STEM, right? I think we have 12% female engineers. Heather, you spent your whole career in banking and finance. You're now in professional services, but as we know, the Allisons of the world, whilst making progress, are still few and far between. And of course, Angela, as you said, the MOD is still largely a very male-dominated environment when it comes to leadership. Do you think that you could work together as sectors to move the needle faster? And how would you see doing that? And what role would you like, for example, government to play? Let me start with Angela on that one.
So I'm probably going to actually talk about the networks within the sectors, if I may, because I do believe that we can work together more than we do. I have calls with chief execs of the various women's networks on a probably not a regular enough basis. Whenever I do catch up, we share so much insight. We help each other out. We help solve issues. So we can all work together. The challenges are the same. It's not a competition. It's often seen as a competition for talent, but it's not a competition. We can do a lot better if we can work together. Mm-hmm. I'm going to pass on what government could do. I'm going to leave that to Joe and Heather.
Okay, so Heather, what are your thoughts? How can the sectors work better together to drive change faster, and how could the government help?
So I'm biased actually because I have the privilege of working with both Angela and Joe. We're from 3 different sectors and we're really passionate about one thing, and that is actually progressing women. So we've already started working together and for the benefit of our CMI members. And so we need more organisations to be doing this. We also bring men into the discussion because, as Alison said in her speech, you can't do this without having a fully diverse group of people sat around the table and taking ownership for that. So that's really important. And actually, I think the government could really back us up in this, really be bold and actually go out to organisations and say, we have got to make the change that's needed. We know that as a result of COVID, more women are going to suffer as a result of losing their roles or all sorts of things. We actually need the government to be really strong and say, no, we cannot go back to where we were 2 or 3 years ago. We need to challenge these organisations in actually saying to them, let's look at what you're doing to support your females in the workplace so that they don't become the casualties of yesterday.
Mm-hmm. So the equivalent of a kickstart program like we have for young people, but for women. Joe, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so well, building on what Heather was saying around CMI women, the sort of similar networks where you can get together with people from across sectors is really beneficial. I've certainly benefited in being able to share ideas of what's worked well and kind of lessons learned, and be able to sort of seed that across various organisations. I think there's a piece around working with clients and supply chain that each organisation can do, and actually those organisations could help pull together their own supply chains to start widen the conversation. I think to Angela's point around the networks within sectors, I think they're fantastic. They do sort of fantastic work, and there's maybe a piece around sort of connecting some of those again to learn sort of from cross sectors. Again, that's sort of what's worked well and lessons learned. In terms of the government, I mean, there's a lot of work around the all-party parliamentary groups. There's one that's just been launched a couple of weeks ago for equity and STEM, for example, that brings in lots of organisations that can start to sort of learn from each other and sort of do research and try and shift the dial. So more focus on that. And I think look at the progress that we've made around this agenda since the introduction of gender pay gap reporting. That sort of having that measure, bringing it sort of into the light and the focus has actually prompted a lot of organisations to really kind of shift the dial through necessity, because the light has been shone on them. So continuing that and sort of expanding it into ethnicity and perhaps disability as well, sort of to continue that piece around intersectionality. So
yes,
so those are my points.
Those are great points. And that point about transparency, CMI worked with the government on the gender pay gap reporting. They did suspend it in COVID. And I can share with you that only about half of the over 10,000 organizations that were required to report did so when it wasn't mandatory. So bringing it back, making it mandatory, excellent point, Joe. Very well made. All your points are really important and well made. Now, my final question before I open it up to the audience. Tonight we're celebrating 50 years of CMI Women, which is a great milestone indeed. Are we going to have gender balance in the next 50 years? Are we going to get there? Heather, what do you think?
Wow. Well, I think if we're going to get there, and pretty quickly, we wouldn't have CMI Women. So we need to be the tool that actually reminds people that, one, we're there here to help them. Two, to remind organisations that they have a responsibility to make sure that they are tapping into all of the talent, which includes 50% of the population. So there's still a lot more work to do. And as I said, the whole thing with COVID has put us back. But I think, first of all, if we can get the government to go back and say, yep, we're going to put those targets, they've got to be mandatory, because we knew that drove change. That needs to continue. We need chief execs like Alison to be really robust about the measurements that they have in place to make the change that they want to see. So this is not an initiative. This is how we're going to do business. And we want to be successful in business. And when we want to be successful in business, we have hard targets wired to the productivity of the people who work for you. And I'll end on that point by saying, what gets measured gets done. So people know if they want to get their bonus at the end of the year, or those pay rises that they want, they need to be delivering on this objective in very much the same way they deliver in the other objectives.
Very well made points. Angela, in 50 years, where will we be? Will we get there?
I'm not sure we'll ever get gender balance in defence, if I'm completely honest. I would love to think we would, but I just can't see that. I think the point of sort of quotas, which I think is what Heather was talking about, versus targets, is a fascinating one, and one that we could debate for a very long time. I sort of intuitively prefer targets to quotas. I prefer levers to quotas as well. And a lever that I would like to see brought in is that in large procurements, there is a social value scoring in there. And that social value scoring would include what is the diversity of your workforce, how many women do you have on the board, or whatever, so that it's encouraged, or it's made necessary via a different route. But yeah, 50 years, maybe in 50 years, we'll have a chief of the general staff who is the head of the army, who's a mother. And that would be an astonishingly big step for defence.
Well, that's great. And as you know, we've seen women taken now on submarines, right? So maybe the reverse can also happen. And with that big boost in military spending, I love your idea of attaching targets to the procurement. So that's a very actionable idea as well. Joe, 50 years from now, what are the prospects? Where will we be?
Yeah, so I'm an optimist, and I also think we need to aim high. So I believe that we will get to 50% sort of gender equity in 50 years. That's the optimist in me talking. And you know, this idea of a kind of 30% tipping point, even if we were to get to that would be fantastic. I do think that we've got a lot of momentum built up, and you know, if we look back at the last 50 years, there's been a huge amount of progress. Society's expectations around different genders have just changed massively in that time. If you then weaving in the sort of the COVID factors, the fact we have got shift around, you know, the latest PPN 06 and the sort of procurement rules around social value are starting to be introduced. So I think that actually hopefully will mean an exponential curve in progress around this. So between 30 and 50% is where I would like to see where we end up. If it's close to 50%, I'll be celebrating if I'm still around to celebrate it.
So hedging your bets there, and don't forget, Alison in her speech said they want to get to that 50% at NatWest by 2030. So she's up for this, and what an inspiring example she sets to us all. Now, you've all got loads of questions, and I want to try and get as many as possible in our remaining time. Our first question is from Joanne Oakley, and she says, what do you think the biggest barrier was to reach the position that you have? And do you think the barrier is still around today? So let me start with you, Heather.
If I'm really honest, I think sometimes the barrier is ourselves, right? Because we don't believe that we're capable of doing something. And I think that was definitely one of mine. And it took people, sponsors, to see the good in me and tell me that I could do this and I shouldn't be afraid of change. And so that's why one of the reasons I make the time to mentor other young women, because they need to see role models, understand the journey that we've been on, and know that they can get there if they want to as well. This isn't for everybody. Not everybody wants a high-powered job, but if you want it, it's there for you. And the fact that you're a mother should not make any difference to you. You can have the best career either way, but you just need to make sure that's what you want and don't stand in your own way.
Great. Joe, what was your biggest barrier?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, building on what Heather was saying around role models, and maybe the sort of absence of role models earlier on in my career represented a barrier. And I also think through that absence of role models, the sort of unconscious biases and expectations of men within the organisation and what they sort of thought was possible for a woman in that sector. I think that's changed massively in the sort of 20 odd years since I've started, but I still see elements of that representing barriers. So that whole unconscious bias piece, and just really challenging expectations of what is possible, what people want from their careers, and trying to reinforce the positive role models that we increasingly have.
Sure. And Angela, you are that rarity, a senior woman in defense. What was your barrier, and is it still there today?
So the instant response that came into my head was barrier for me. What I had to give up my career when I became pregnant. Those were the rules at the time. It now seems ridiculous, but those were the rules at the time. If you became pregnant, you left the army. And you, at the time, weren't allowed to come back in. But you know what? That barrier actually has helped me tremendously, because it was so inherently unfair. It made me think about the rules for women, about how we're treated, and probably spurred me on, even though it was 30 odd years ago now, more than that. It spurred me on to do what I do now. So maybe barriers are a good thing, because they do encourage you to think about them, to try and change them, and to sort of probably get where you at the end of the day.
Yeah, challenge and change those barriers. What a great story.
Yeah.
So, okay, we a great question here from I'm going to pronounce this wrong. Is it Liam? No, Leo. It's an Irish name. I'm going to make a hash of it. Leobhan O'Donnell Ruin. Sorry, I apologize for that. But she says, "Hello, I'm a final year Nottingham Trent student. What advice would you give a female graduating next year into this marketplace?" Joe, what advice can we give her?
That's an interesting one. I mean, I think there's a great deal of strength and advantage in being a digital native. I think understanding the sort of, where organizations need to get to in terms of how they deal with technology and their grasp of technology. And actually, as someone sort of younger within the workforce, actually you bring a lot of advantage. So sort of really engaging with that and understanding the strengths that you can bring into that place would be helpful. I think there's a piece around maybe sort of the expectations of when you start. I mean, we're sort of onboarding graduates, and at the moment have been for the last few months, and the experience of bringing in graduates into an organisation in this climate is different. So I guess being open and agile to that, and flexible as needed as well, would be good to bear in mind.
And Heather, what advice are you going to give the young women entering the workforce now?
Okay, they need to make sure that they join CMI Women. I'm just going to be biased and say that because that's the greatest network to help you. And you need a network to help you when you start work. And the other thing is, look up somebody who you really admire. Stalk them on Twitter, stalk them on, LinkedIn, see what it is that they're doing, what you could learn from. Because I think we're not going to have the accessibility of seeing leaders face to face as we did before. So you really need to find out what are their traits, what are they doing, how can you learn by them. The best people to learn from are the people that are out there and put themselves out there, and also play it forward. When you've benefited, remember the journey you've been on and play it forward and help someone else.
So I'm going to build what Joe said, and Heather, Maggie Buggio, who's the senior chief revenue officer at SAP, said that a young person profiled her on social media and listened to her and then sent her a whole bunch of recommendations about how she could get more involved in the things that interested her. And I know that made a really big impression, and I'm sure that she's going to reach out to that person. But Angela, your advice for these young female graduates?
Well, actually, it picks up on what your young female graduate did, the example you just used. My advice is be brave. Mm-hmm. Be brave. You're so much smarter than you might think you are. You're so much more able than you might think you are. Just be brave and go for it. Anyone wonderful. Can be courageous for 30 seconds, and that's all most things take. Be brave.
That's wonderful. And there's a big shout out for your me first, then you first advice as well as the recognition that that's really tough. So here is a question which you touched on. I'm going to start with you, Angela. How do we overcome women getting into certain positions purely to fill a quota or tick a box? You didn't like quotas. How do we prevent that?
That's probably one of the reasons why I don't like quotas, actually. I don't think that really happens. I honestly don't think that really happens. No one would question it if there was a quota for men to get into particular positions. They wouldn't be saying, oh, yes, he's just filling it to tick a box. So I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure that reflects reality. Mm-hmm. I don't think women do. I think that's perception. I don't think that's reality.
And Heather, what do you think?
I challenge them, actually, because I can sure tell you that I don't tick any box. I'm Heather Melville, and I'm here because I can do the job, and I can do the job well. And I think for organisations that don't do that, it's going to backfire on them, right? Because if your culture's not right and you're just about hitting the numbers, it's not going to be sustainable, and those people are going to leave. So you're going to do more damage to your organisation than you did in the first place. So I would really strongly suggest that you stay away from quotas, focus on the whole piece around collaboration, and bringing people in, measuring the success, and creating a culture that they want to work and they think that they can thrive in, because action speaks louder than words.
And Joe, you said role models are so important, but they're pretty rare in your sector. How do we overcome, the one and done syndrome of one woman and we're done?
Yeah, and I think around that there's a lot around understanding what good looks like. Jobs should go to your best athlete, but I would say that the whole challenge is around what does constitute your best athlete, and the sort of inherent unconscious bias and assumptions that are made by people. So that's the sort of that's sort of my focus. Is not one and done. It's actually using that as a way to really challenge how we recruit people, how we promote people and progress people through the organisation and retain them. It's really being open to what does good look like, what skills and what behaviours do we need to actually get a job done, not necessarily just focusing on the kind of what competencies, what jobs have people done before, or assumptions, unconscious biases that those in senior management positions may be making, and really trying to drive change through that continuous challenge. And I think that's one area that sort of quotas or ambitions, or however you say that, actually does continue to create that challenge for senior leadership that means they have to keep a focus on it. And that can only be
yes. And don't forget, Alison said, if you want the business benefits, you have to have that tipping point. So one and done is nowhere near enough. You need at least 30%. Now, this is a question originally for Dr. Heather Melville, but I'm going to ask each of you because it's a great question. It's from Diana Costin, who says, Dr. Heather, who do you think is coping better since March 2020 with the business challenges we've had to face as a country, men or women?
So I can be biased on that. Look at the countries that are led by women and look at the number of deaths they've had and the number of people who've had the virus. I think that answers that question. I won't name them, but it gives you some kind of idea. You think about the Caribbean, you think about New Zealand, you think about Germany. But to be quite truthful, I think we may have gone back to a place where it's nearly had to be 50-50, because right now everyone's working from home. Those that are family units have got to look after the children together. There is no way for dad to just leave mum downstairs with the children while he goes upstairs, because the children, they're not going to accept that. They're going to go and knock on the door. You've seen evidence of that on some of the live streams where the children have gone into the room and shaken daddy and said something. So I think it's a mindset, and the mindset that's happened as a result of COVID is that we're in this together. Right, we've got to take equal responsibility for looking after our families. That means in some instances the men are looking after the children while the women are doing their jobs. And I've seen it with my own team where they're actually having to break their days in a different way. So daddy might do the daddy daycare during the day while mummy's doing her work, and then they swap in the afternoon. So actually that's got to be a really great thing that's happened as a result of COVID.
Yeah, and Angela, women or men, who do you think's done better? And Angela might.
This is a really hard one. I've been sitting here trying to work it through. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. It's a really hard one. I've been sitting here trying to work it through in my head. I still think we are our own worst enemy when it comes to trying to do too much. And I think in the sector that I'm in, I'm sure that it has changed that much during COVID. So Heather's point about, it didn't have to look after the kids and women as women do. I'm not sure I see that reflected as much in defence, to be blunt.
So we need more men in defence looking after the kids.
We absolutely do. We absolutely do need more men in defence looking after the kids. We need more men in defence taking up flexible working, because at the moment it's all women that are taking up flexible working. And until we sort of rebalance that, yeah.
Okay. And Joe, men versus women, who copes better?
Yeah, again, I mean that's a difficult one. I think it's sort of individuals are in such different circumstances that it would be a sort of sweeping generalisation, I think, to sort of say, whether it was all men or all women. I think, I mean, there's a lot of research that women are still taking more of the household and family burden, even during COVID. So, whilst I see really good examples in my own organisation of lots of men sort of doing their bit and covering half or more than half of homeschooling, I suspect there's lots of other examples where that's not the case, and I also do wonder whether sort of men have, maybe it's held as a bit of a sort of bonus, or they get a bit of credit from it in a way that maybe women don't. So that would be one reflection. Another, I suppose, is a sort of certainly I think everyone's felt the sort of absence of being able to sort of socialize face to face with people, and having to really work at the sort of, I suppose, the softer elements of how you function within a workplace. So I'm not sure whether that sort of benefits either women or men, but I suppose it's certainly something that everyone is feeling, I suspect, particularly those that are working remotely from home. And that sort of thought of, again, that sort of we're in it together, we are. I think it's opened up a lot more conversations about mental health and well-being with men in particular, who've maybe been less comfortable about doing that than it would have done before. So that's certainly a benefit, I think, as well. It generally seem to feel more comfortable about having an open discussion about vulnerabilities and how people are finding it difficult. So I'm probably going to sit on the fence around this one.
Well, it is true. We've just released a major piece of research last week at CMI, Management Transformed. And what we found is that the human characteristics of leadership, like listening, like communicating, like having empathy and looking after well-being, have become more important. And that's for women as well as men. So listen, we have so many more questions. But we want to make time for networking. Now, the good news is that many of the panelists are going to join us for the networking and host it as well. And you can continue these discussions and your questions during that time. And please do come back and join us again at 6 p.m. when we are going to be joined by our second guest. Actually, it's 5:50 p.m. I got that time wrong. Who is what I call him the original male ally. Paul Pullman, the former chief executive of Unilever, will be joining us. You'll hear a keynote from him, and then he will join the current CMI president, Lord Mark Price, in answering your questions. But before then, stick with us, do the networking. It only falls upon me to say a huge thank you to CMI Women board members and CMI companions, Dr. Heather Melville, the chair of CMI Women. Thank you so much. Joe Moffett, the deputy chair of CMI Women, for your wonderful thoughts, and Angela Owen, a CMI Women board member and founder of Women of Defense. And stick with us to join us for networking. And here's Matt Roberts, our own director of membership, to tell you what to do.
Thanks very much, Anne. And the sheer number of questions shows that the conversation could go on, and the opportunity is there for that to happen. So if you click on the networking option in the menu at the top of your screen, you'll be asked then to select one of a number of different networking rooms that you can join that are based around some of the themes that we're exploring today. Up to you which room you want to enter. Click onto the room of your choice. You'll then be asked just to complete your networking name badge. So if you can pop your name and perhaps your company or organization details into there, the system can also take a quick photo of you. You'll then see a very quick tutorial before being taken into the networking area. And on the screen, you'll see your own avatar, either of your photo of your initial, if you don't take a pic. And you can drag that around the screen to join conversations with other people that are here with us today. There's well over 250 of us on the stream right now, so plenty of opportunity to share thoughts and experiences ahead of coming back to join Paul Pullman. So click the networking option, and we look forward to seeing you there shortly.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to this special celebration of 50 years of CMI Women. Well, we heard earlier from the inspirational Alison Rose, the CEO of the NatWest Banking Group, and one of the themes that Alison touched on during her speech was just how vital it is to have male allies in the efforts for gender balance. And so I'm especially pleased to welcome one of the pioneers in this male allyship, Paul Pullman. Now, Paul Pullman is the co-founder and chair of Imagine, a social network that mobilizes business leaders to be forces for good in climate change and inequality. And he's also honorary chair of the International Chamber of Commerce. But one of the things you'll know him best for is as the former CEO of Unilever from 2009 to 2019. And he was one of the first CEOs to champion not only sustainable business development goals, but also gender balance. And probably the first in the FTSE 100 to have actually achieved that gender balance at Unilever. He is somebody I've known for decades from my time with him at Procter & Gamble, and he is an absolutely inspirational speaker and the original male ally. Over to you, Paul.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm especially pleased to be speaking at the Chartered Management Institute to celebrate 50 years of CMI Women. When I was chief executive of Unilever from 2009 to 2019, during this time, we made significant strides towards a gender-balanced and inclusive organization. In fact, the proportion of women in management rose from 37% to about 50% globally. It was equally important for me to have a board comprised of 50% women and 50% men, which made us probably an outlier at the time, and frustratingly, this probably is still the case today. In my own experience, almost every success story involves setting targets at every level and tracking them rigorously throughout. But as Rebecca Marmer, Chief Sustainability Officer at Unilever, said earlier this year, there have been hurdles along the way, in particularly measuring the impact of initiatives to enhance opportunities for women has proven to be difficult. Now, to overcome this challenge, we need more professional managers and leaders who are committed to advancing the science of management by testing initiatives, measuring their impacts, and sharing the results for the benefit and review of others. The Chartered Management Institute, through its unique charitable mission and work with CMI Women, should continue to be at the center of these efforts. Now, today I'm proud to co-lead Imagine, which actually helps companies meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals, including goal number 5, achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls. Overall action to meet the goals is not yet advancing at the speed or scale required. 2020 needed to herald a decade of ambitious action. But it is fair to say that the world is not in an easy position right now. We have not yet fulfilled the promise of a world in which every woman and girl enjoys full gender equality, and where all barriers to their empowerment have been removed. In fact, we may now be even more distant than before due to the gendered impact of the COVID pandemic. Now, I was proud to help establish for the UN the He for She initiative back in 2014, because men need to be able to understand and explain clearly that supporting women does not mean that men lose out. Everyone wins from gender equality. It's as good for men as it is for women, because empowering women and girls represents probably the single biggest opportunity for human development and obviously also economic growth. Well, so my first challenge to men is to get involved for the right reasons and help others to understand those reasons. Secondly, all male managers should be dedicating time to mentoring women. If you do not have at least one female mentee, this must be resolved straight away. And since CMI has a mentoring matching service, there really is no excuse. I also challenge men to show their commitment by developing sponsorship shortlists which should be diverse and gender balanced. While spotting talent is an ongoing task, you can in fact start today by jotting down a list of women in your teams who you could support more directly. This support can be demonstrated in many different ways. Advocating for promotion on their behalf, making introductions to influential people in your network, making sure they have opportunities for visible priority work, or recommending them for presentations to senior leaders, or to speak at high-profile events. Look for opportunities to demonstrate recognition regularly, ensure women are praised and credited for their success, and for special contributions. Look for awards or rewards you could nominate them for. There are many other practical ways men can become better allies. We should be role models for flexible working and inclusive working practices, whilst challenging work practices that do not foster an inclusive culture. We need to call out microaggression, bias, and any form of marginalization. But I pose a third straightforward challenge to men. Consider how women are involved in all decision making. There's in fact no excuse for a male-only meeting to take place without the lack of gender diversity being raised and clear action to address this being taken. As a male ally faced with a situation where a decision is being made only or predominantly by men, my first question needs to be, why are we considering making this decision with no or so few women involved? It's wrong and it's bad for business. Speaking candidly, we must be aware that supporting women may become harder as greater progress towards gender equality is made. As a gap narrows, it can be deprioritized and the underlying problem easier to brush away. This year 2020 has been so incredibly difficult for so many people. But not all of us have experienced the same level of difficulty. Ask yourself if you, like me, have been protected on an island of prosperity within a sea of poverty. Have you benefited from privileges in ways that others have not? Well, let's respond by all collaborating with optimism to create a vision for the future that includes everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now the decade for action, and we must act together. Thank you very much.
Well, welcome back, everybody. And weren't those inspirational words? And now I am absolutely delighted to welcome to the panel to take questions also from you. So put them in the chat box. First, Paul Pullman, who you just heard his inspirational words. Welcome, Paul. Then Lord Mark Price, CMI's current president and the former deputy chairman of the John Lewis Partnership, the chair of the Fair Trade Foundation and the founder of Engaging Works, as well as the former trade minister. Welcome, Mark. And of course, joining us again is Heather Melville, the chair of CMI Women. And Heather and I are going to be interviewing Paul and Mark on the importance of male allyship and how men can help in these vital efforts for gender equality. So if I may kick off with that first question, Paul, you said in your words to us that male allyship is essential. I'd like to ask both of you, first Paul and then Mark, based on your own experiences, how do we get more men to become allies?
Yeah, absolutely. There is the rational argument for that, and I think we've rehearsed that enough. I actually even feel guilty to have to explain that, but there's overwhelming, obviously, evidence that a more balanced organization in all its aspects is a more engaged organization where more people feel that they can develop themselves to their fullest potential. And obviously, these companies are doing better. And the good thing now is with ESG, as we call it now, we have data coming out of our nose. So you nearly have to be daft not to buy into that. But I think what has always driven me, you need to get to the heart. It's brain and heart at the same time need to work. People talk about courage quite often, and that we need more courageous leaders, but that at the end comes from the French word cœur, which means the heart. And for me, it's inconceivable that we can, as a humanity, live together long term in a sustainable and more equitable, more inclusive way, and get to the SDGs if we don't put the dignity and respect for all at the center of that. I fight for people with disabilities. I chair the Valuable 500. I've always been an LGBT champion. And the same here when it gets to gender or the race dimensions coming in right now. Unless we have dignity and respect for all and equity for all, we will not get there. So try to really get to other people that intellectually might understand it. And fortunately, more and more now do understand the importance of it. You also need to get to the emotional side, or I would call it the inner core, as well as the outer core. And the inner core actually is the most important thing that drives it. The biggest bottleneck why these numbers are still atrocious, in my opinion, is this unconscious biasness, as we call it, which frankly I don't call unconscious anymore, but that's the part that needs to be worked, not the programs or the policies.
Yeah, that's a great point. Mark, what are your thoughts? How can we tap into that unconscious bias or conscious bias and get more men as allies?
Well, I've always thought of it, Anne, in terms of a process. It's about how you think, how one thinks, and then it's about the words you use, and then it's about the actions. And in my own case, I was very fortunate. My dear old dad was a preacher, and he used to say to me, Mark, in the eyes of God, nobody is better than anybody else. And then when I went to work for the John Lewis Partnership, it was actually enshrined in that business's constitution that there had to be equality and fairness to all within the business. And in fact, there's stories about the founder of the business, Speed and Lewis, at the end of the Second World War, when many capable women lost their jobs when men returned from the war. He recruited them. He just pointed out this is a huge waste of talent. And therefore, in terms of my own thought process, what I've seen is the argument for equality in every sense, gender equality, equality around diversity, etc. But once you've understood that for yourself, I think you have a responsibility, and Paul used the word courage, which is right, to explain that point of view to others and to call it out. And Anne, I thought you made a very strong point recently in an article about board meetings and men talking about football and ignoring their audience. And something like that happened to me, funny enough, when I was chairing the Waitrose board. And the conversation would always start with, how did Tottenham do at the weekend? Or what did you think of the way the rugby was played by England or somebody? And one of the female members of our board afterwards said to me, that's not a very inclusive conversation. And it really struck me, actually. And so once you've had that thought, it's then about what words do you use to try and convince people that isn't right? And we said that, that's not the behavior that we would adopt. And then it's the actions, it's calling it out. So I think the process is much the same as Paul says. You've got to win the intellectual argument. You've got to have the evidence to say this is right, and we all know it is right. And you've got to, I think, also almost have a moralistic point of view that you believe it's right. It can't be wrong that one group of society has some kind of preference over another. It just can't be right. But once you've then accepted that, it's calling it out on every occasion, the words you use, and demonstrating through your promotions, through your appointments, that what you value most is talent and ability, irrespective of the gender, the colour of skin, the sexual orientation. And if leaders do those three things, then we will change things.
Yeah.
Great.
Well said. Can I add one thing to that?
Sure. And then I think Heather has a question.
Oh, Heather, go ahead. Sorry. No, go ahead.
No, you go, and then we'll go afterwards. Because I don't want you to lose your point.
I think what Mark is saying, it brings two thoughts to me. The first one is if you do this, you have to be consistent about everything. And too many companies have siloed programs. Oh, this now I need to, unfortunately, the tragedy of George Floyd, I now have racial equality that I need to drive. I don't have time for disability, or I don't have time for LGBT because I need to do gender balance. You have to see this holistically. And the second thing, if you want to be genuine, I also think you have to take that through into your total footprint as a company. Many companies think they can outsource their supply chain and also outsource their responsibility. What makes John Lewis so special is they take responsibility of their total footprint in society. So with Unilever, we had gender diversity programs within our value chain. We wanted to have half of the smallholder farmers be women. We wanted to deal with businesses run with women. So we wanted our brands to unstereotype. So you have to be consistent in all you do. Otherwise, it looks like an add-on thing that isn't really getting into the culture and the behavior of a company over time.
Mm. Such valid points. I want to take you back to our school days, because a lot of the behaviours that we see for young people, and we know when children are born, they don't see difference, they don't see colour, they don't see gender, they just see their friends in their schoolroom. What would you say to teachers that they would need to really spend time nurturing their children on, so that when they go into the place of work and university and other things, they don't feel the difference, and particularly young men?
Shall I? So I think it comes back to the things that I talk about. First of all, teachers have got to absolutely believe that everybody has an equal place in society. We've all got skills and abilities that are different to each other. Every one of us, because of the way we've been brought up, our education, because of our life experiences, we've all got a different outlook on life. And every one of those outlooks is valid. You know, if I disagree with somebody, I disagree probably because I've had different experiences and I've had a different education path or whatever. It doesn't mean I'm right and they're wrong. We've just come to a different conclusion. And therefore, if you start teaching young people, for me, the starting point is to explain that. It's not that somebody is wrong. It's just that they are different. Their views are valid. And if you're prepared to take the time to listen to somebody else's views and understand why they hold them, then you can either adapt your own view or you're able to explain to somebody else why you have come to a different conclusion. So the nurturing that needs to happen in school and in business is about accepting that people are different with different skills, listening to that, and then from that educating and coaching into why the world can be viewed in a different way. If teachers talk to boys about women have an important role to play, they're just as capable, and then they follow that through with actions in the classroom so that the contribution of the girls is seen as just as valuable as the contribution of boys, then you start to say things. But it's not just at school, it's throughout, I think, everybody's working and business life.
Thank you. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Paul?
Well, I don't want to be emotional, but I'm now in the Netherlands with my mother. She is 92 and she is in the process of moving on. And she was a teacher. And I would not be sitting here were it not for my mother. She insisted that we would always do our homework before we go out. She would test us. She wanted us to have the education which was deprived of that generation because of the war. But she treated all of my 6 brothers and sisters equally, and she wanted us all to develop to that fuller potential because she believed that we all were here for a certain mission, that we all had a little diamond inside of us that could shine. And my sisters have been as successful, if not more, than my fellow brothers. And it all boils down again to how you see human beings. You see human beings for their full potential, not for their skin color or if they wear glasses or not, or if they are male or female. And this is how we need to see each other. Unfortunately, we've been trained by the press, by politics, by perhaps the way we got educated, that we need to dwell on the differences and that we need to accentuate them. Look at what happens in politics, how we are driving people apart. And the sad part is that we probably have 99.5% of things in common. So, but we try to fight over the 0.5% and kill each other for it. So why don't we just go back to these basic human values and bring back this this compassion might be the wrong word, but bring this compassionate leadership back that we need also in business. Bring humanity back into all we do and see each and everybody for its full potential of why we have been chosen to be on this wonderful earth right now.
Thank you. Over to you, Anne.
Very moving, it's sorry to hear about your mom, and thank you for joining us and for for sharing that with us. But you both have talked about, and Mark, I've heard you say this as well, that managers' roles are to respect the needs of the individuals, and we also know that in this crisis that certain human traits, and Paul, you referenced this, like listening, like compassion, like communication, have become incredibly important. How do we ensure that we keep humanity that we've seen in leadership, that we've seen in COVID, post-COVID, and that we make it part of, the normal way of leading organizations, and that we don't just restore factory, if you like, crisis is over. So how do we do that? Well, let me start.
Well, it happens to be that to be successful moving forward as companies, if you want to bring it to the private sector for a second, the skill sets that you need are quite interesting. We need more purpose-driven companies. We know that they are more successful in many aspects, including a financial performance. We need companies to think about the long term. We need the multi-stakeholder approach. So partnership is going to be incredibly important. And all these skill sets that we're talking here about, systemic thinking, if you want to, are skill sets, actually, believe it or not, that are better given to the female race than to the male race. So if any company wants to be successful long term, then I'd invest there. And I actually invest in developing those skills also if I was a man. There was a book that came out a few years ago, I just remember, which was called The End of the Era of Men. The writer escapes me for a second. But I sort of looked in it in the bookstore and I was worried about it, that this is, we're done. But if we don't adapt our way of behaving, we are done. If you look already during COVID, the countries that were most successful in treating that were the countries that actually had the highest trust factors, to be honest, with society. And these were countries run by women, the Norways, the Icelands, the Finlands, the Denmarks, the New Zealands, the Taiwans. And I think there's something to learn from this. So we could abandon it. We could forget many of the lessons of COVID. We could turn this pause into a restart of where we came from. First of all, it would be a disaster for humanity, and we'll have another COVID back within 10 years. And that is not a option that I think many people are choosing for. Or we can take the lessons and say, isn't it time that we work all together on creating a more inclusive, more equitable, and more sustainable environment and for generations to come, which goes to the essence of the Sustainable Development Goals. It happens to be that trajectory creates more jobs, creates better jobs, more resilient jobs, better social cohesion, and a world that actually we can all live in. So this is where I'm focused on with my efforts right now. And that's what I encourage everybody else to do, because it needs all of us.
So Mark, how do we get that? How do we make that the way that we lead coming out of COVID, that human leadership?
So I think that COVID has fundamentally changed the way that people will manage. From the research that we do at Engaging Business, we know that 2/3 of people are now saying they want a flexible working life. They want some time in the office and some time at home. We see that scores in terms of workplace happiness are higher, particularly around information sharing, because managers have had to give more information to their teams for them to perform their tasks remotely. In addition to which, people feel more trusted and empowered because decision-making has to be passed down. And as a consequence of that, there's been a benefit in how people feel. And therefore, I think many managers are now realizing that they can trust their people. They've had to do it for 6, 7, 8, 9 months, and they can do that. And that, coupled with this desire for greater flexibility in the workplace, will be good things. The things that are going to be less easy is the whole piece about career development, which you obviously, Anne, at the CMI do a brilliant job of. So how do you cope with career development going forward? How do you do that remotely? But I think that one of the things that I learned through my business life was the power of having a servant-master relationship in reverse. So when you are the manager, when you are the leader, your job is to support those people that are working with you to do the very best they can. That's your primary role, rather than all those people are serving you, make you look the best you can be. And COVID has done that. It's flipped it on its head, because you can't be there every day with your team, them looking after you. You have got to empower them to do a job. So I think that is a structural change that will make people reflect on how they are managing today through COVID and lockdown, and how they want to manage going forward, and how people want to be managed. So I think there are positives that will come out of this about independence and trust, and sharing more information and thinking more about individuals' well-being, all of which are going to be positive.
Thanks. Over to you, Heather.
So I'm sitting here thinking we're with two legends who've really made a big change in the businesses that you've led. What could you share with us that we could tell our members, particularly in CMI Women, that they should be doing better to engage more male allies throughout their careers? And I'll start with you, Mark.
Well, I've always been a great believer, and I was told at an early age that cream ultimately rides to the top. And that if you focus on doing a great job, looking after your people, and your people perform, that's the very best platform to start with. I think after that, it is trying, as I said earlier, to make sure that male leaders are properly educated and informed wherever it is, through their school life, through their home lives, and when they come into the workplace, about what behaviours are acceptable and what behaviours aren't. Nobody can say, and Paul said this in his first contribution, that it's acceptable now to not treat people equally and fairly. It's just not acceptable. So having got people to accept that fundamental, it's then a question of calling it out and demonstrating actions as a leader every day to make sure those things don't happen. One of the best descriptions of culture I ever heard was it's the sediment of past transactions. And every day as a leader in a business, you are putting down sediment. You are doing things that people are looking at. And Paul said this earlier, they're either calling it out as being good and fair and open and honest, or they're calling out as being unfair, deceitful, and not trustworthy. And so every day you have a chance to create the environment that you want to create for women. And I would say that the role of women is to point out where that isn't happening, or any group to point out where that fairness isn't happening. Only through that will we get the change that we all want to see.
Thank you. And Paul?
No, I love that, Mark. The culture is the sediment of past transactions, and I might steal with pride as on top of the panels. I just love the expression there. I hadn't thought about it, nor had I heard about it. I don't want to repeat what Mark is saying. I just want to be perhaps positively provocative to the people listening in. You're celebrating 50 years. That started with women in management. Eleanor started that. And frankly, if you look at it now, 50 years later, we cannot be satisfied with where we are. We cannot just say we have come to what we set out to achieve. And that really shouldn't be the case. So there's a level of, I think, impatience that borders on the anger, where we need to really be firmer now in calling out, just like we have to start calling out companies that deny climate change or human rights or slave labor or child labor. This gets to the same level. And anytime we see people that now willfully don't work actively to address that situation, they become complicit. And I think that is actually dangerous. And we should be really firmer at this point in time. And that's why I start to think about not using the word unconscious biasness anymore, because with the awareness that is out there, with the discussions that we all have, I wonder to what extent it is still unconscious. So this is my first point. What we did in Unilever, I don't want to rehash that. That's not important. But I do think it's the lead from the top, and too many organizations delegated to the HR department, or the CEO comes in with a little sheet where they read off the latest sustainability initiative to hire a few more women. And you might laugh about that, sadly, but that still happens in many companies, and I can see it. When you have an honest discussion and looking eye to eye with a lot of the CEOs, I wonder how many can really hold the conversation. So you need to start at the top. And in Unilever, I was always chairing the Sustainability Council, but I put people on that from senior management who had the biggest gap versus objective. And sometimes they might not have been really convinced, or they came from a culture that was different. By being responsible for the company and having to explain it to 175,000 employees, I tell you, put the ones on there that have the biggest gap, and they close it the quickest. And that sends a signal throughout the organization. Then nothing beats all the programs that you need, from the flexible working to the maternity, to the paternity policies, to the mentoring programs. I don't want to go through all of them, but the book of tricks is big, and you need to really use all of them, and actually don't make them gender specific. We try to make everything gender balanced, we called it, and that's the term we were starting to use, which came from Ibera when we worked with her when she was still at INSEAD. But make everything available to everybody. That's why our maternity policy, we also have the paternity policy, and we insist on doing that. Then the next thing is obviously put some numbers behind it and start measuring the progress on the culture, including the unbiasedness that is in there. We were able to work with Iris Bonnet, I think, from Harvard, where we looked at people over a 5-year or 10-year period, how many women were promoted. So it's nice to have the story, but what is actually your track record? And we started linking that to performance. We started linking that to the opportunities to be promoted. And frankly, I didn't get that far in Unilever. I left when it was gender balanced, by the way, and our board was always gender balanced from the moment I came. But I was hoping that eventually it would lead to discussions like, if you still don't believe in it, you really don't belong in the company. And that's how you have to do it at the end of the day. Fortunately, I didn't have to deal with that. So these are some of the simple steps that you need to go through. But there is a certain nice ruthlessness about continuing to underperform in this area, and that we need to have the willingness to deal with and confront. It's gone on too long.
Yeah. So that nice ruthlessness, that's a great phrase. Now, we do have some time for questions, and we have a lot of questions. We've talked a lot about calling out behavior, but here's a question from Padre Joseph Goggin. He's asking, what solid steps can the government put in place to increase the pace of change in industry? Or can they? So maybe, Mark, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it was interesting. Before we came on air, we were talking, and Paul was saying about the power that business has to lead government rather than the other way around. And I think that's right. I think that business can lead through example. Those organizations that have got balanced boards and think about the equality of their employees are bound to do better. And I think that promoting that is important. I think that there should be legislation from every government around, gender pay, et cetera, and you see that. But ultimately, it's down for individuals to believe it, and it's down for leaders to make sure that the people they work with see it and adopt it. So I would say that government can do some things around reporting, which they do. I think government can do some things about equalities, which they will say that they do. But ultimately, it comes down to every individual in an organization calling out when things aren't right and championing things when they go well. I would say that I wouldn't necessarily look for government to lead on this. I would look for enlightened leaders to lead and for people to keep pressing in the way that you have.
Right. Well, I'm going to take another question here because we're the clock is ticking. One for you, Paul. How do we, from Lauren Walther, she's asking, how do we challenge gender-based adjectives? So men are authoritative, boss, for example.
You know, I was just, my wife sent me just an article that she was reading a few days ago, and it said a lot of words that we cannot use anymore. And I felt embarrassed because probably half of these words I use, and I had no idea that they had a connotation that people took offense of. So it has become very delicate. And even with the best intentions, I would be the first one to claim not to be perfect. I think, Lauren, that the way we, let me think. I think it was Stephen Coven who said it very well in his book, 7 Habits. I don't know if you've read it, but I sort of enjoyed that book when it came out for some reason. But he said, you cannot talk yourself out of things you have behaved yourself into. So if by any chance you use the wrong language or give the wrong impressions or make a mistake, which we have all done, nobody is perfect. I certainly have done that. Then apologize, to be open, try to understand, correct, and learn. Even now, I have, with my wife or with my daughters-in-laws, I have 3 sons, or with my grandchildren, I hope they tell me this is not how I perceive what you think I perceive, or this is not how you should say it. And they do correct me because the world is moving on, and sometimes I move on a little slower. But, you know, the great thing is we can learn, be humble about it, and apologize. And I also hope that the discussions don't become politically charged or tense or fearful, which is happening in some countries. You know, my wife is American. I worked a lot in the US. I have a great affinity for the country. There are many great things there. But boy, on the issue of gender diversity, you feel like you're walking on eggs. Even holding a door open in the elevator and telling a woman you can go in first, which is really how I grew up. And I still think that's the way it should be. You might risk getting a comment like, you know, we are equal, you should go in first. So be very sensitive, be open, be apologetic, be human. And but try to be yourself. I don't think we want to have everybody tell us how we should behave, provided we don't violate the basics, that we treat everybody with the dignity and respect that we've talked enough about.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So there is a question here. There's loads of questions, but there's a question here from Francesca Essery, and she's saying, look, we know that COVID has impacted women more than men, right? Every data point says that. So, you know, what are we going to do to fix that? What, you know, how are we going to address these impacts? Mark, let's hear from you, and then Paul.
So first of all, Francesca, you're right. The data we've got is that men and women are happier at work. A year ago, women were happier than men in all the research we did. This year, men are happier, so they've increased more. There are particular things that women have found more difficult. The burden for childcare has mainly fallen to women, and that's been difficult to juggle with their working lives. And caring responsibilities have primarily fallen to women, and that again has impacted on their working lives from home. So you're right, what you're saying is right, it's borne out by the facts and the evidence. And I think that what has to happen as a consequence is that people just again have to become more thoughtful about how people fulfill their roles, the flexibility that they're allowed to do that, and the support that they're given to do that. Because if you believe, as I fundamentally believe, and I know everybody on the panel fundamentally believes, that everybody is equal, where people are not equal is in carrying some of those responsibilities out. And therefore, I think employers have to be sensitive to that. And they have to find ways of having meetings, allowing more flexibility, etc., so that people can carry out those roles. So you're right, Francesca. And what I would hope is at the back end of COVID, organisations have a review about what's worked well and what's worked less well, and they do it for the different cohorts. What you find is that younger people are less happy than older people, for instance. Younger people want to get back to the workplace, older people are more than happy working from home. If you look at it across an ethnic lens, you find, again, different variations. So I think it's that insightful look back across gender, ethnicity, age, to work out what in COVID has been helpful and what has been unhelpful. For younger people, as I said earlier, career progression has been, definitely been impacted. It's hard to train, it's hard to be developed, it's hard to get on. And so there's an issue for younger people around that. So that would be my feedback. You're right. And I hope that lessons are going to be learned through a thorough review of what's worked well and what's worked less well.
So I'm going to, we're coming to the end, but before we do, Paul, I'd welcome your thoughts on that last question, but I want you both to answer. It's CMI Women 50th anniversary. In the next 50 years, are we going to finally get there on this issue? Paul, what do you say?
Well, it's not a dream. The reality has to be that we cannot wait another 50 years. Obviously, CMI has many other things that it will have to develop itself in, but I hope that it can obsolete the part that focuses on gender equality well before the 50 years. If not, I'd be terribly disappointed, and then it would not be good for society. So with that level of impatience, I'll leave that. But there are other things that you need to start thinking about that probably expand to total inclusion, because I think that will be an issue that is more difficult to get out of our system in that shorter time frame. But I hope with equality that we can do it better. I also believe that it is now the time, like you see in companies, the biggest pressure CEOs are getting to change now, and certainly we've seen that during COVID accelerate, is actually from their employees. Everybody now understands the engagement score, or if they're an employer brand, or what the retentions are. And this bifurcation has been showing up even more vividly during COVID. So my point is, as we see now more employees speaking up against climate change or delivering mattresses to the borders where children are separated from their mothers, or not providing face recognition tools to the governments, employees are becoming activists. I believe in every company there is a Greta Thunberg. And interestingly, the CEOs are getting more sensitized to that and react hopefully positively to that if they're smart enough. Be your own activists in your circles and be your activists in your companies, always constructively, always driving it in the right direction, always with solutions, but speak out more. Don't be that timid anymore. One person was saying in the US with George Floyd with Black Lives Matters, there's now a whole movement coming in the US where people are saying, I am giving up my board seat, comfortably as it might be, but I'm giving it up now because I want a person of color in the job. So we need more courageous people like that, or more women on boards that say, I just demand that. I demand that that is going to happen, that these board seats are being vacated, and that we solve these issues now at an accelerated basis. I had to do the same in Unilever, where the hiring ratio for the outside, for mid-career hires, which we did about 5,000 a year, we moved that to 75-25 in favor of women. I got so many people complaining to me and so many men saying that this was grossly unfair. Well, I thought it was grossly unfair to run a company with 100% men, and I was determined to fix that. So being a little bit more forceful now doesn't hurt us. Absolutely doesn't hurt us.
So that's a great note to end on. You've heard it here. Be nicely ruthless. Be your own activist and call it out. Great advice from two wonderful and legendary male allies. Thank you so much, Lord Mark Price and Paul Pullman, for being with us tonight. Thank you, Heather, for being such a brilliant chair of CMI Women. And let's hope we close this a lot faster than 50 years. If you enjoyed this evening, we'll be sharing highlights with you tomorrow from our inspirational speakers, Alison Rose and Paul Pullman. And if you've not yet involved in CMI, please do join us as well. Thank you, everybody, and good night.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Mark.
So if you'd like to continue the conversation, then do head over again to the networking tab on the menu. You'll find that there's an option there for the end of day networking room, and do come and join us within there and we can continue the conversation. Rest assured, any questions that we didn't get to today, there were huge numbers, are all going to be pulled into fueling what we do next with CMI Women. And your thoughts are a great contribution to keeping us going with all that we can do around achieving gender equality.